Hey lovelies, this is Janelle, the relationship coach behind The Successful Invisible. And I'm here today with another episode of Response and React. The Manosphere's red pill men don't believe their own crap. So Netflix dropped Inside the Manosphere with Louis Theroux. I believe he is a respected documentarian out of the UK. And baby, the way these alpha men folded under basic questions was almost comedic until you realize young men are actually listening. Side note, not just young men, older men are also listening. Because let's talk about the scariest part. They're selling relationships like a power game, not a partnership. They're teaching men that women are the enemy, that respect makes you weak, and that one-way monogamy is just male biology. Meanwhile, their own body language is screaming shame, insecurity, and confusion the second anyone calmly asks, "So, is your girlfriend actually okay with that?" The whole thing folds. And here's what I need women to understand. You don't just date the man, you date the ideology. If he's been discipled by podcasts that teach entitlement, control, and contempt for women, then you're not in a relationship. You're in a debate you never signed up for. If you want my practical vetting tools for this, like the Manosphere Detox, screening questions, red flag phrases to listen for, and scripts for shutting down double standards early, I keep all of that inside my exclusive coaching community on Coffee. Link is in the description box below. And if you're ready to date with clarity and stop entertaining men who want power, not partnership, click, sign up, and get started today.
Netflix just dropped a new documentary called Inside the Manosphere, where British journalist and host Louis Theroux sat down with all the red pill podcasters and social media influencers to discuss men versus women and all things from the gender roles discussion. The doc features personalities like Sneeko and Myron Gaines and Justin Waller, all these guys who have made their money going on the internet saying that men are dominant and women need to be subservient. Now, one of the highlights from multiple discussions with these guys is the idea of one-way monogamy.
Myron's been quite open about the fact that he expects to be in a relationship in which there's one-way monogamy, as he calls it. He's allowed to basically pursue other relationships, but you're not.
The women that he's with, he's just gonna be with them for like a night or so, whatever. But I don't think he sees me that way because there is a reason why I've stayed so long with him.
I don't want to mix things up between you, right? But
yeah.
But we were talking about in the future that maybe there's a world where you would have more than one wife, right?
She understands that.
One-sided monogamy, yeah. Women don't want to sleep with other men when they love a man.
One-sided monogamy means what?
It means like, see, here we go. Here we go. Set me up. For my children, the woman that I'm with, she doesn't talk to other men. So, stings, huh? You seem upset by it. You seem upset by it. People get so upset with me about this.
This guy being like, it stings that I fuck all these girls, doesn't it? While alpha male Myron is sitting here talking with his little lapdog. Like, these guys are so ridiculous. And that's the point I want to make about this doc. I will watch this for sure, because I do think there is interesting conversations to be had about modern day gender roles. I do think that men and women are at odds with each other in the modern era. I do think we're speaking different languages. I do think that we're wired differently. There are actual intellectual conversations we can have about men and women that shouldn't be men versus women. But in terms of Into the Manosphere, what you have to understand is these red pill manosphere guys, they're an act. This is for content. This is for subscribers, followers, money, attention. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure they believe some of the shit they're talking about, but for the most part, they're doing it because it gets a lot of attention on the internet, and they can make money and be famous because of that. That's what the red pill men do, the same way that the women are on OnlyFans and being thoughts on Instagram. Those are the two opposite extremes of men and women on the internet, and somehow we, as a society, have decided that they represent the general population. Men are saying that all women are hoes, and women are saying that all of these men are abusive and terrible, and they're the freaks of the world. It's like going to the circus and being like, can you believe this is how people behave? No, they're the freaks. You go and watch a bunch of clowns like swallowing swords and shit. You're like, that's how men behave? Then you go over to the bearded lady in the freak section. You're like, this is what women are? No, these are the people performing extreme shit for attention and money. There are legitimate conversations to be had about men and women. It just shouldn't come from red pill podcasters and internet hoes. They don't represent normal people.
If Revenge of the Nerds was a doc, it would be Louis Theroux's Into the Manosphere on Netflix. He's a total dork talking to these hyper-masculine influencers and he makes them look small. He's showing us around this weirdo world as a normal guy who makes them all look like idiots without even doing much. He interviews Myron from Fresh and Fit alongside his girlfriend, and when Myron says, "In the future, I would like to have multiple wives," Louis just very calmly asks his girlfriend, "Are you okay with that?" He's so delicate in the way he approaches it. They break up before the end of the doc. He seems like the politest guy who would get sand kicked on his face on any beach in the world, and yet they stand no chance against him. We've had a ton of content about the Manosphere at this point. This is not the deepest look at it. He does not break new ground. But there's something about the Louis touch that makes it compelling. It's kind of how dorky John Wilson can make a documentary about scaffolding in New York City, and I'm riveted. I'm watching the Louis doc because of the way Louis moves through the world that he's covering. He's that dorky white documentarian who makes the people he's talking to look stupid without even doing much. His awkward silences, his very straightforward questions lead them to fall on their face. It's never like he's argued you down. It's like he just gives you enough space to clown yourself. In one interesting moment, one of the Manosphere losers mocks Louis Theroux as being controlled by the Jews. Louis says nothing. Little does this Manosphere moron know, Louis made one of the most critical of Israel documentaries of the last few years.
So I just watched the Manosphere Netflix documentary that just came out, and I am not being dramatic when I say this. What those male influencer guys are selling to young men is genuinely very dangerous. These are influencers right now that have built massive audiences of young men, and they are telling them that women are essentially the enemy, that respecting women makes you weak, and that relationships are all some power game. And young guys are listening. But here's the part nobody's talking about. The opposite of toxic masculinity is not weak masculinity. It's strong men who treat women with respect. Men who are confident enough that they don't need to tear down women to feel powerful. I was raised to believe something very simple. Secure and confident men don't go around hating women. Secure and confident men build with women. They partner with women. I am not anti-man. I am pro-better men. And we definitely need more of them to speak up and push back against some of this stuff. For the sake of women and for the sake of the young men who are still impressionable and looking for male role models.
Obviously, watch the Louis Theroux documentary, the Manosphere documentary. Give it a watch. Be warned, it's kind of a tough watch. After finishing it yesterday, I felt gutted. One of the scenes that kept gripping my fucking throat was seeing how some of these men, some of these like faces of the Manosphere, the main subjects in the documentary, would walk through the streets and have their male fans just being like, oh my god, like they were, you know, witnessing Jesus coming back into Jerusalem, doing, you know, Hosanna. And in the documentary, Louis Theroux focuses on one of these male fans. This one guy had, his brother died, he was homeless, he talked about how he didn't want to be stuck in the 9-to-5 struggle. And later on in the documentary, you see a lot of these Manosphere guys, you know, endorsing the current administration. A lot of them are responsible for, you know, kind of spreading that, you know, propaganda about this administration and putting this administration in power. Now, part of the reason I felt so gutted is because these male fans are never going to see how they are creating a systemic problem for themselves. These same guys listen to these Manosphere guys, and of course, you know, they also get their political takes from these Manosphere guys, and then they run to the polls and vote for an administration that is absolutely against them. You're talking about experiencing homelessness. You're talking about not being able to make a living wage, and then you go ahead and vote someone in who enacts policies that are directly affecting American pockets. These AI data centers are increasing everybody's electric bills. You know, right now we have this insane war that we've gone to with Iran, and now gas prices are completely up, you know, and you tell these guys, you know, that there is a direct link between their actions and their consumptions of this kind of content and their worldviews that cause them to vote in a certain way, and they're not going to see it, or they're going to play dumb, or they're going to be purposefully obtuse, and the cycle will continue. The snake will keep eating its tail, and we are the ones who are left to deal with the consequences of this. Anyway, give the doc a watch. It's a good watch, a tough one, but definitely give it a watch.
You want to know the craziest part about the Louis Theroux documentary? It was the part where Louis goes to Miami and he interviews these two fans of this red pill influencer, right? And they talk about how they've moved to Miami and it's been hard and they're homeless and, you know, all of that stuff, right? That's already kind of a bit iffy in itself. But the main part was how they don't believe in mental health, right? And red pill kind of teaches, or some of these guys teach you that mental health is not real. Like, man up, right? You got this. And you could tell these guys are going through it. You could tell they're trying to put up an act. And the worst part is when, you know, he talks about how mental health's not real, and then he talks about how his brother had taken his own, you know, life. Yo, that was crazy. Like, it's almost like it was scripted. That's how crazy it was. It's almost like it was scripted. It couldn't be more in your face. You know what I mean?
If a guy was to ever introduce me as his dishwasher, documentaries like this really prove that the immense patience I thought I had is a lie, because how Louis Theroux was able to maintain any form of composure in the presence of these, I don't even know what to call them, but I definitely ain't calling them men. All right, the Inside the Manosphere documentary, let's talk about it. For those not familiar, Louis, a great documentarian, great journalist who meets a range of manfluencers who promise impressionable young men a life of status and financial and sexual success. Now, if you saw the way I had to mentally stretch before I hit play, because I knew what this was going to do to my blood pressure, and I'm already anemic as it is. Now, the other documentaries and deep dives I've seen that touch on this subject, I've always been able to kind of zone out and mock the way that these people talk, because to quote Nella Rose, "Are you not embarrassed? This is really embarrassing." But what was really bleak about this one was the amount of followers and engagement these boys have. One of the funniest moments for me was when one of them, I didn't care to know their names, one of them was so visibly anxious around Louis, and Basic Inquiry sent him spiraling. Do you know how insecure you have to be quaking just by somebody else simply standing there and asking relevant questions? The hypocrisy, it will make you itch. The cognitive, what's the word I'm looking for? Dissonance is insane. Yeah, my A-level psychology was creeping up a lot while watching this. And the common theme with all these weirdos is that you can clearly tell that they've created their own little bubble where they entertain these delusions of control. And when someone reasonable steps in and questions them and challenges them on it, they lose all sense of composure. And the default response they could give back to Louis was, "You're just not manly enough." Because the pinnacle of a successful man in their eyes is F bitches, get money. And that is something I've noticed and admired about Louis as an interviewer. He brings up a lot of questionable, controversial aspects of a person's behavior, and he doesn't interject or react too quickly. He just listens to them, listening to their own foolishness, hoping that the cogs will turn and they'll realize, hold on a minute, I sound stupid. It doesn't happen, but hey, it's a great tactic. Now, don't get me wrong, I thought this was a great watch, but there were moments where I was thinking, for those that are on the internet, from the chronically online to the casual scrollers, unfortunately, this isn't anything we don't already know. I imagine this must have been a real shock to the system for those not familiar with the manosphere and the terms associated with it. The main takeaway from this is that men might lose their hair, love, their wealth, but one thing they will never lose, oh, it's their audacity. And side note, how are we taking advice from someone called HS Tiki Toki?
Listen up, lads. I just watched Into the Manosphere with Louis Theroux, and we really need to talk about masculinity. Now, I've got a lot of thoughts. I think one of the most troubling pieces is young men buying into the idea that you are born without value. These influential men who have become famous through farming red pill content have clearly grown up with a lack of good male role models in their lives. And it has created certain insecurities and self-defense mechanisms, such as burying your true emotions. Now, that's their own issues that they need to sort out. The problem here is they're projecting those insecurities and self-defense mechanisms onto young, impressionable men. and they're telling them that the world hates them, but I love you. And that's creating a parasocial relationship based on hope. What they're actually doing in this father figure-like role is weaponizing that hope and building pyramid schemes that are based on selling products that don't actually benefit the end consumer. But they do make the individual at the top of that pyramid scheme more rich. And then they're creating content about how they've beaten the system, or the matrix they call it, and showing how financially successful they've become, which continues the cycle. Now, the women that are utilizing the manosphere to monetize their own content have their own issues that they need to deal with. And they're being used as examples of what it is to be a woman, and that is influencing young men's views on women that are not necessarily representative, and that is very dangerous. The irony about all of this is these influencers talk about people at the top keeping young men down, but that is exactly what they're doing to their followers. They've created their own matrix. Anyway, I'm gonna keep talking about this topic and trying to fight the good fight.
You know, there are two things that the Manosphere documentary failed to address. Because it's the language that's so hard for people to identify in highly controlling relationships, we have to say it. My name is Haley. I'm an educator in domestic violence. Follow along if critical thinking is your jam. The first thing that wasn't said is that the central ideology is that women cannot be trusted, therefore need to be controlled. Now, if we look at the Duluth model power and control wheel, it shows us exactly the coercive control tactics that are being used to control and manipulate people, specifically women. Male privilege, economic abuse, using the children, intimidation, coercion and threats, isolation, gaslighting, minimizing, denying, and blaming, and emotional abuse. The Duluth model recognizes that abuse is driven by entitlement and control, desire to have power over another person. It is exactly why this ideology becomes abusive behavior, because the ideology itself is abusive. This is what so many people struggle to identify, because if a relationship isn't physically abusive, it's very hard for people to name that it is, however, emotionally abusive. Emotional abuse is abuse. Especially want to speak to the fact that a lot of these people do not believe that they are causing harm. And this is so common because they believe that they are here to be the savior. They are here to be the powerful, in control one to help you. Heaven forbid a woman have autonomy or refuse to be controlled. Because in their minds, women are only useful as far as their body is available to them. This entitlement to taking. Another connection that was just barely touched on is the way that this enters political spaces. How has this been so successful? And the answer is obvious. This is also the ideology that our systems are all built on. The patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, an entitlement to taking land, resources, women's bodies. It is both at the foundation and it is at the top. And it infiltrates everything. So I disagree that this is fringe rhetoric that's becoming mainstream. I just think a lot less people are bought into that system. Thought about it this way before. Let me know what you think in the comments. What did you think of the documentary? Share this with someone you were just talking to about it and save it to come back to later. 3 special mentions real quick is the rage baiting and the way that that has entered the real world outside of the internet. It's super intimidating when it happens to you by a middle schooler or a high school in real life. Extremely common because these young boys are being indoctrinated by these specific influencers. The collective indoctrination of people, it is very dangerous. And the reinforcement that happens when these groups of people come together. I'd love to talk about how this happens and why people are so vulnerable to it. So let me know if you want more of this.
Let's jump into my favorite part of all of the content I post on YouTube. And that's just my thoughts, where I get to kind of express what I feel about whatever we have read or gone over. So let's get into it. All right, you know how I like to do with these videos. I like to come up with 5 really important salient points that came up for me as I was creating this content that I really want to make sure I put in front of your face, especially from the perspective of a relationship coach. So let's get started. Point number one. One-way monogamy is not a preference. It's a power arrangement. When a man says, I can sleep around, but you can't, that's not biology. It's control plus entitlement dressed up as a relationship model. This documentary spotlights this dynamic as a repeated theme among manosphere influencers, including one-way monogamy and multiple wives talk, right? A coaching emphasis that I really want to draw your attention to here is that if exclusivity is non-negotiable for you, don't negotiate with someone who is openly selling you a double standard, okay? The power and control framework explicitly names tactics like male privilege, emotional abuse, and economic abuse as tools used to maintain dominance. That's what this is about. It's a power play and it's about dominance. And be very wary of a man who says that, because he is showing you he is going to say and declare he can do something and then put limits on you in his quest or thirst to have this really unhealthy and unsafe for women power dynamic of domination. Point number 2. The women are the enemy storyline is a dating red flag. It predicts emotional harm, right? A core manosphere idea is that women can't be trusted and therefore must be managed, ranked, or controlled. Side note, leaving women alone never occurred to these idiots, but anyway. The UN women has warned that online misogyny and manosphere content is moving into intimate relationships, not staying online, and leading to, in some cases, intimate partner violence, right? So a coaching emphasis I want to put around this is a man who frames women as opponents will eventually frame you as the opponent. That's the pipeline to coercive control behaviors: isolation, minimizing, denying, blaming, intimidation. And you have to understand that most abuse starts out with this type of rhetoric, with seeing you in some type of oppositional role and then trying to treat you as an enemy. It starts small. It's not something you should ignore. And a lot of these men don't want to just leave women alone. If women can't be trusted based upon their own ideology, why don't they just leave women alone and stay in the company of men? Most men are homosocial anyway. Many men are not being honest about their sexuality. And that is been this anecdotal notes, anecdotal experience of my clients. I'm not saying every man who engages in manosphere content is, repressed homosexual. Not at all. But I believe far more men are not being honest with themselves than we truly understand. And instead of dealing with that, they are leaning into projection of this maybe hatred, disdain, etc., that they may feel for themselves. They're projecting it toward women. Or there's some men who want the adoration and chasing that women receive, so they're jealous of women from that perspective. Once again, this is not necessarily about someone's sexual orientation, but it's about the way a man views women. And you need to listen intently, especially in the early stages when a guy is talking, because he's going to reveal a lot to you about how he processes things and how he thinks about women in the context of a relationship. Point number 3, don't confuse confidence with contempt. Contempt is one of the biggest relationship killers. So these influencers in this documentary often sell dominance as masculinity. But what you see in practice is contempt, belittling women, humiliation in public, power games. That's not strength. That's insecurity, performing for the audience or for the gaze of other men, particularly here. Research in major institutions describe misogyny as hateful or controlling beliefs/attitudes toward women. And those attitudes show up as real barriers and behaviors. And once again, if you see it, pivot away from it. Don't try to negotiate or talk to them about it. Leave men alone who act like this towards you. A coaching emphasis I really want to expound upon here is during vetting, contempt is an automatic no. And contempt can show up a lot of times, clock this ladies, in facial expressions. When someone's lips curl back, especially like their upper lip curls back, that is the face of contempt. And it is an almost impossible emotion for a person to hide. Men, women, white, black, doesn't matter. Contempt is a very hard emotion for a person to hide. Even if they quickly change and, realize that they're scowling or have their lip curled up, pay attention. Contempt is real. If he's quoting red pill content more than he's showing empathy, he's not ready and he's probably unsafe. And he also, if he's been indoctrinated into this stuff, he is really okay with blaming you for all of his shortcomings. Any man who needs to degrade women to feel like a man, he's not a safe person. And we know, how we feel about unsafe people over here. We don't do them. Point number 4, Manosphere content is engineered for attention and money, not for healthy relationships. A key point is that in this ecosystem of the manosphere, rewards extremes, right? Rage bait, polarizing men versus women, alpha male, branding, all this stuff. It rewards that behavior, that ideology, and that expression of men towards women in a relationship. Manosphere's toxic influence is so prevalent that there really needs to be a concerted effort to counter it. And I think there are some organizations working on it. But if you, in terms of dating, it's not your job or your role to try to shift the opinion of a man about women. Like if he hates women and has this very problematic and unsafe mindset toward women, let him be. Don't bother with him. A coaching emphasis here is don't date a man who uses podcast ideology as his personality. And it's really weird when men do that. It's telling that he really doesn't know how to assess and process information beyond the point of his own ego. And he's living his life from that. That's also a lot of information you're receiving. Point number 5, the fanboy devotion piece matters, right? You saw in the clips, but if you watch the documentary, I highly recommend it. You are going to get disgusted at parts. But anyway, there's like this fanboy devotion piece and you know, young men who run up to it, some influencers. I think some of it is staged, but whatever. Parasocial bonds can make people follow very harmful advice. And that is why social media is such a beautiful place, but it's such an ugly place at the same time. Because fans who are treating influencers like saviors is more common than people realize. In the manosphere space, it is very toxic and violent, but it can happen with regular celebrities. And that's why it's important to be very mindful of how you view content and the people who come through in your media feed, right? That's not random. Parasocial relationships are one-sided emotional bonds people form with media figures, and they can shape attitudes and decision making, right? And that can be in any area of life. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of what you are consuming and what the men you may be dating are consuming. Research on adolescents/young men highlights how misogyny often rides in on adjacent content, meaning like fitness content or self-improvement content, which makes it easier to absorb without noticing, right? It's like when you were a kid and you had to take some nasty medicine and your mom would like maybe put it with some sugar or some candy on it or something to make it a little more palatable. That's the same thing that's happening with this very problematic and harmful content. It usually comes on the back end of something that was, you know, innocent or positive, like healthy, getting fit, going to the gym. That is oftentimes the vehicle through which this type of content comes in, and it can turn young guys, especially, into these fanboys for these manosphere talking heads, right? Coaching emphasis I would like to make here is if a man is being mentored, air quotes, by internet strangers, meaning he is not paying money to be mentored by a person specific for him and his growth, yeah, that is very scary. These internet strangers are teaching him to distrust women, right? You will be fighting an invisible third party for the entirety of your relationship. You also need to be very, very honest about the personality type of the men you're dating. So what I got from the documentary holistically was men are followers and they don't like it, and they project all of their shortcomings on women, because it shouldn't take 3 podcast episodes for you to radically hate women. And men are easily indoctrinated into this stuff. I know this was mainly about young boys, and many of these influencers' target audience being like 13 to 50-year-old men, young men, but a lot of them are reaching older men, and there's grown men with fully formed brains and fully formed abilities to reason that are crashing their relationships, burning them to the ground, because they are choosing to listen to this very harmful feedback about women or takes on women, and it's about ego. It strokes their ego. Another thing I noticed in this documentary was that this is just a personal observation. if you are a type of person who, in any capacity, a grown person who has watched like adult films, right? I definitely have in my time, and I don't mind watching same-sex adult films. Many of these men seem to be very, very repressed sexually. I'm not saying all of them must be gay. That's not what I'm saying. But from observing how on edge they were, to have an actual documentarian come in and ask them real questions about the bullshit they're selling, they know that a part of this deep down, that this isn't okay. They know that they are actively causing harm because they want some money. And I think a lot of them aren't being honest in one way or another about how they feel about women. They may hate women, but they won't explore the why. They may hate women because of childhood trauma. They may hate women because they are jealous of women and want the adoration and being chased by men. They may hate women because they don't like women. They just like women for their utility and their orifices. They may hate women because they are repressed, bisexual or homosexual. There's 1,000,001 possibilities that could be it. But I think a lot of these men aren't being honest about the why, because it doesn't make sense. And even in the one clip, which I thought was hilarious, when you watch the documentary, you'll see it. The documentarian, Louis Theroux, interviewed one of the young ladies that was partnered or in a house with the guy, or I forget. And he asked them what was her favorite thing about the guy, and she said his money, point blank, period. And I think that also goes to show that what these men demonize and focus on so heavily, they create in their own lives. She was totally comfortable being honest. I like him for his money. And that's the very thing they don't want, are these quote unquote gold diggers. But guess what? They've made themselves so distasteful with these beliefs and the promotion of this content and being the face of it. For what other reason would a woman want to deal with them? They're not nice people. They're not decent people. They're not people where a woman would be safe around. So then the only way to get women to be around them is to use money, the very thing that they have so much distaste and disdain for. And then they engage in a lot of hypocrisy, like the guy who's basically an online pimp for OnlyFans models and, you know, having sex in the bathroom, getting a blowjob. Like, all of these things that they say they're against, they're actively doing. You know, it's so much hypocrisy, it's so much trash, and it's so much men not dealing with the root of the issue. You know, and a lot of it is them not being honest with themselves about why they don't like women. As I said before, that could be 1,000,001 things, but their refusal to deal with it and wanting to put those problems, oh, it's women's fault, I don't like them. No, it's not. It's you guys' fault that you aren't processing thoughts, feelings, and emotion with a properly licensed mental health professional about why you hate women. So those are just my thoughts. Little ramble there at the end, but let me know if you've watched the documentary. I highly recommend it. I think there's a lot to it. It's going to make you cringe. Some people argue that it didn't go deep enough, but this particular documentarian style is to ask a few questions and kind of let the subject reveal themselves. And that's what I think he did a good job doing in a way that was very approachable for most. It is cringy and it will piss you off, I won't lie, but definitely watch it and let me know your comments below. So here's the takeaway. The Manosphere isn't just content. It's a belief system, an ideology. And belief systems show up in how a man treats you when he's disappointed, when you set a boundary, when you say no, and when he's not getting his way. A man who believes women are the enemy will eventually treat you like one. A man who needs one-way monogamy isn't asking for love. He's asking for permission to be entitled, and he is stating that he has the permission to disrespect you. And a man who calls respect weak, he's telling you in advance that he's unsafe, when real partnership requires humility, right? And mutual respect. If you want help spotting this early before you get attached, I have the Manosphere detox vetting questions, red flag phrases, and boundary scripts inside of my exclusive coaching community on Coffee. Link is in the description box. Come join us when you're ready to date smarter and stop negotiating with misogyny.